think we'll get started, everybody, if that's all right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a quick intro and then a some little running order. So thank you everybody for coming in. And I was just going to start by saying, so here we are with our brand new Sustainable Huddersfield Future Sustainable Building webinar. So welcome. We will be recording this, so please be aware that we'll be doing that, and I hope everyone's comfortable with that. First of all, what I was going to say was, as we're emerging from our coronavirus lockdown slowly and potentially not quite as surely as we thought we might be doing the other day, then there's absolutely no doubt that the construction industry is going to be one of the key sectors that's tasked with driving forward our financial and our commercial recovery. Maybe sort of even more importantly, it's also a sector that's uniquely placed to bring about a lasting change as well in the way that we interact with the planet and with our communities. And still, of course, maintaining a grip on our 21st century life and all it currently and hopefully in the future embraces. So this event really sort of brings together 3 expert speakers, each with a unique take on what the topic of sustainable building means. And that is from commercial construction and occupancy to pioneering approaches to residential off-grid self-building, and also embracing, of course, the concept of the passive house along the way. So each speaker that we've got lined up here is going to showcase examples of their own experiences and skill sets and share insider tips and tricks and ideas and concepts, together with a few pitfalls maybe of things to avoid. And there'll also be an opportunity to ask the panel questions at the end of the session. And what I'd like everyone to do, please, if you can, is to write your questions in the chat function on the Zoom platform, and then I will field those across to the speakers, if that's all right. So the speakers that we've got lined up for us this evening, we've got Rob Hopkins, who's Regional Director of AHR Architects, and they're the designers of the newly launched Spine building in Liverpool, which is home to the Royal College of Physicians and officially one of the world's healthiest buildings. And Rob's going to be telling us a little bit more about that and about his designs and so on. We've got Mike Peterson, who's a former international IT director, and he's turned builder of his own sustainable off-grid eco-housing projects using a variety, I would say, of innovative techniques and sustainably sourced materials. And we've also got Chris Herring, who's director of the Green Building Store in Golka in Huddersfield. That's one of the UK's leading experts, Chris is, of high-performance window design, and he's also chair of the Passive House Trust. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over without much further ado at all to our first speaker, Rob Hopkins. Rob, it's over to you for 10-ish thereabouts minutes, and then I'm going to come across to our next speaker, Mike.
That's great. Thanks very much, Chris. Thanks everyone for joining us, and I'll give you a very whistle-stop tour of what's effectively been the last 4 years of my life, an incredible journey with the Royal College of Physicians. The college, it's a 500-year-old organisation now. They were established in 1518 with a charter from Henry VIII, and essentially they were set up as giving out the first medical qualifications in the UK. There was lots of charlatans strolling around London pretending to be doctors, and so this was the first accreditation for the medical profession, and they continue to this day to uphold the values and the very highest of standards in medical research and practice. They've moved house sector effectively 6 times in that 500 years, and the last time was in 1963 to their current headquarters in just on the edge of Regent's Park in London. As they were coming to their 500th year anniversary, they really wanted to consider how they could reach out closer to their members and their fellows across the UK and the world rather than just London, and so looked at a number of options in northern cities, and Liverpool gave them this really compelling offer that they would essentially, the council would build a building for them. They could rent that space back on a 25-year lease, And that was then essentially, there was a mini competition to establish an architect for the building and the fit out, and we were successful in winning that. And one of the kind of the number one thing that we put forward to essentially link architecture and the built environment with their values around medicine was the use of the WELL standard, which was reasonably new at the time. It had only been rolled out in a couple of buildings in the UK. And so this was essentially, we kind of talked to the college about what kind of level they wanted to go for in WELL standard. There's silver, there's gold, there's platinum. They said we uphold the very highest values, so we have to go for platinum. We've got no alternative. And there's 110 points that you go through in WELL. And what's really interesting from their perspective was that there's 3 or 4 medical research papers that sits behind every one of those. And so it really does link in medical outcomes with architecture and the built environment. What they hadn't appreciated was that the majority of that research had been done in Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic in the US, and it had actually been done by their own fellows. And so they were using their own research that was essentially sort of incorporated into WELL standard. That number down on the left-hand side, that's where we currently are with our points. So we needed 80 to score platinum. We're actually scoring 109 at the moment. So when we say it's one of the healthiest buildings in the world, it really isn't, because we just integrated all of the values of WELL into the building at the briefing stage. It really didn't cost us too much to achieve the standard. And it also meant that we could actually, really max out and go for as many points as possible. And very simply, there's 10 areas that WELL standard splits itself into air, water, nourishment, light. You can see those on screen, and you can score a maximum of 12 points in each of those areas. There is more than 12 points available in some areas. There's less than 12 points available in others, but we were really keen to sort of push as hard as we could to just score as many points as possible. So this is the building. It's right in the new Knowledge Quarter in Liverpool. It's a very striking building. The pattern on the outside is called a Voronoi. That was named after a Russian mathematician from the early 20th century that developed this mathematical idea. And essentially, that is the pattern that we have on our human skin. We developed this pattern on a macro scale so you could see it from across the city, but then also on a micro scale. So there's 23 million polygons that are all unique on the facade, and you'll see some of those in a moment. Not to kind of go through every single point that we went for in the building, but we kind of set up this rule that just said you'll feel better when you walk out of the building than when you walk in. And we used WELL standard to make sure that would happen. For instance, there's the air supply in there goes in at 12 litres a second. That keeps CO2 levels down to between 800 and 900 parts per million. So what you might say, well, that has about a 10 and 20% increase in cognitive function by keeping a really low level of CO2. The filtration in there, again, we've used MERV 12 filters, which again, you'll say, so what's a MERV 12 filter? Well, what a MERV 12 filter does is it takes out the very small particulate matter in the atmosphere. And that's really important in terms of our sort of post-pandemic world, because the coronavirus pandemic sits on around that PM 2.5 module. That MERV 12 filter takes 80% of those out of the atmosphere. So it makes it a very, very safe environment for people to be in. It also means that lots of really kind of dangerous, sort of cancerous type particles from the outside just can't get into the building. There's lots of sensors in the building. Every 300 square meters, there's a sensor. They're linked to displays, so you can see how much CO2 is there. You can see what particular matter is there. We've used a really healthy palette of materials in terms of everything that is timber in there is solid oak. There's no use of adhesives or glues in there, which was a real challenge for furniture. But we were very, very strong on making sure that every material was natural. The paint in there may look like standard paint. It was a special paint that neutralizes formaldehyde. So again, it really helps control formaldehyde levels in the atmosphere. The plants in there, they were based on a clean air study done by NASA in 1989 when they were going to permanently position people up on the in the space station. And so we've selected plants that remove toxins from the atmosphere that photosynthesize more than other plants, so the oxygen levels are higher in the building. Again, where we've got plaster, we've used a clay plaster inside the building, so a real focus on materials that would give a real good quality of air. In terms of light, then, you know, we've set up really nice rules that say that every single workspace is within 7 meters of the glazing. So that means that everyone has a brilliant view. It's the highest point in Liverpool, 360-degree views, absolutely incredible. You can see all the way across to Snowdon, down to Shropshire, Peak District, Pennines, up the Lancashire coast, the most incredible views. And again, that nourishes the mind. It's not just about, you know, it's not a distraction to people. It's something that actually makes people more effective in the workplace. It also means that you get connected very closely to your circadian rhythm, so your sleep pattern. So on average, people will sleep about 45 minutes extra a night in a much deeper sleep because they're very, very closely connected to the sun and a natural circadian light. To mean that your body really knows when it's morning, when it's afternoon, and when it's evening, and that's something that can easily get lost when you're in a deep plan building all day. We've got lots of biophilic lights in the building, so again, all the plants have a special lighting system that's independent of the main lights for humans, and they just focus on helping those plants live. So they know how long to stay on. They can turn off to help the plants sleep at different times. So again, it's been really interesting that we've got a human lighting system and a plant lighting system in the building. And then finally, just to pick up on nourishment, this was a huge area of wealth. So there was loads of really interesting rules around nourishment and making a healthy building. So how you display food, making sure that more fatty foods are at the back of a display, healthier foods are at the front. Always lots of fresh fruits and vegetables on display. Mindful eating in terms of making sure there's a variety of different diets available. You can only put 300 calories on a plate, so we designed slightly smaller plates so it looks like you've got more food, because 300 calories really isn't too much when you're buying a portion of chips. But again, these were all about encouraging behaviours in people, not to say you can't buy more than 300 calories, but to say to people, to give them an awareness of what they're actually eating. So, you know, when you pour a cup of hot chocolate from the drinks machine, it'll only pour half a cup because that's 300 calories. So, you know, you can press the button twice and get 600 calories, but it gives you this really great awareness of what makes a healthy building. And so, as I said, the college have focused for 500 years on medicine and making people better. This building is all about salutogenics. It's about people not getting sick in the first place. We think it's going to be a real test bed for research in the future going forward on many levels, in terms of work environment for people, in terms of a conference environment, a restaurant environment. And you know, we're kind of so lucky to have been involved with this project. You know, the fun has only just started. Getting the data back now to see whether it really is one of the healthiest buildings in the world is kind of where it's going to end up being interesting over the next 5 years. I think that's my 10 minutes. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much indeed for that, Rob. What a fabulous insight. And I've been very, very privileged to have been able to have a quick tour around, of course, which is where we met Rob, around the spine in Liverpool. And you're right, the views are astonishing, and it is an absolutely amazing building. I'm not quite sure about a building that tells you how much to eat, but I'm still very, very intrigued by the whole thing. I'm going to go to Mike in a couple of moments, but I think that our Huddersfield MP, Mr. Shearman, Mr. Barry Shearman, wants to maybe sort of ask a quick question, if that will be
only Chris. I wish you wouldn't keep calling me an MP. No one believe a word I say after that. We are. I should have said quickly at the beginning that the Sustainable Town Initiative is a project to show that in a typical town in Britain, we can actually achieve sustainability under United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And if we can do it in what is the sustainable, the average town in Britain, my constituents only don't like that, the typical town in Britain. We can do it anywhere. And we're aiming to, we're well on the path of getting 50 towns to collaborate with us, and we want to go to 500. So what we're doing is a kind of an experiment in terms of sustainability. So that's very important to us, and we're only slowly growing this particular working party. And because we believe in evidence-based policy, each of our areas of interest is divided into working parties with really high-level specialists in each one from our local community. We had a webinar only from our Health and Wellbeing Sub about 2 weeks ago, and global with some really international about how you build a healthy hospital. We've just got a couple of 100 million to renew our hospitals in Huddersfield and Halifax. And when I looked at the initial plans, it looked like a 1970s, 1980s hospital, but with new cladding. And so we brought together the Health and Wellbeing Group, some international experts say, what does the hospital of the future look like? What's the very best anywhere? And so, what you said just now about a healthy building was of great interest. And I hope that can, there aren't barriers between our groups. And this is our newest group, and it's a fledgling group. And obviously we're going to build more members of it. But other groups that are bigger and stronger at the moment will feed into this as well. So thank you so much for that first presentation. But it touched some really interesting points of conversation that we need to have afterwards, because that hospital project is large, exciting, and could be very, very radical if we do it together. Thanks.
Great, thanks for that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Barry, and thanks once again, Rob, for the fabulous presentation. I've just noticed, by the way, that in the chat already we've got Chris Kenworthy just saying, "Nice work, Rob. I've just signed up to be a physician, so they'll let me in." Well, I'm not a physician, and I had a tour. So if you ask Rob nicely, Chris, then you may get a chance. So,
well, again, one of the requirements of the WELL standard is that you have to give public tours of your building to essentially share knowledge with people. So there will be, I have become a tour guide as well as an architect now, so I do a monthly tour of the building. So I think the college are just in the process of trying to set up a proper website to get the visits going, because it is proving extremely popular.
No, absolutely, Robin, and quite deservedly. I'm going to pop across to my very good friend, and I declare an interest here. I've known Mike for many years indeed, more than I care to imagine, actually, Mike. But just to introduce Mike Peterson, who is actually down on Zoom as Mike Johanna. But that, I think, Johanna being Mike's wife, of course. Mike's a former IT international director turned builder of his own sustainable eco-housing projects. So as Mike was telling me and reminding me on a couple of occasions, he sourced his own materials, researched his own construction methods, and found out kind of the hard way around a whole series of must-have tips and tricks towards building genuinely off-grid sustainable housing. So Mike's going to give, I hope, some thoughts, ideas, insights into the various projects, including turning that 200-year-old building into an exemplar of eco-friendliness, Mike, as well. So over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I just set out a stall a little bit in the beginning, but my background, which goes way back, my background is I'm trained as a physicist, and then postgraduate into renewables, and then a lot of energy work, which was done in the 1970s when we had energy problems and we had to close factories and shut them down and save a lot of energy. So my background is mostly in business. So we did all that energy stuff, but it was very difficult to apply anything in those days. So my background in business is IT, e-learning, which we brought into the UK, things like internet security, which and we work between Norway and the UK. And at the latter part of my career, I was actually I'm kind of a trade ambassador between Norway and the UK, and that's kind of a little bit important because I suddenly realised that the guys in Norway were living in really nice houses, and it was -20 outside, and it was warm inside, and we didn't have very much heating on at all. So I thought there's something going on here. So we lived in Norway for quite a while. And then when we came back into the UK and then now in Scotland, we decided that what we should do is build a Scottish house in the style of with Norwegian technology. And so we started building a timber frame house in Scotland. And we built that one up over a number of years while I was still working. So it was quite hard work. And that was stone clad, but triple glazed. Some bits and pieces that we brought over from Norway. One in particular, because I had some decent business contacts, I think we brought lots of people in the UK have fridges. And if you have a fridge, you put it up against the wall, for example, that warms the wall up. In Norway, lots of people have engines that they put into a cupboard, and they take the coldness out of the cupboard, make it into a fridge, like a walk-in fridge, and it warms up the utility room. So actually I managed to persuade at some point a pilot to allow me some hand luggage from Bergen into Newcastle, which was a fridge engine, which was quite good. And that's plugged into the house here and actually the fridge actually warms up my utility room. So the house that we've actually built and finished in 2009 has got the ground source heat pump. It has the hot water panels on the roof. It has huge water stores and PV outside, triple glazed, and really important, completely sealed windows with heat recovery systems in the attic. And it's very cheap to run. So that was a good exercise. That was on a greenfield site and building it up. And it took a few years to do, but there was a lot of interesting things that came through. After that, we had an opportunity because we purchased many years ago a Scottish farm workers building, which was old, about 200-year-old, very small, but walls that were 2 feet thick, made of stone. And I decided, my wife wasn't that keen on it, I decided to convert that into an eco house. Really, really hard work. All the walls aren't straight. There's problems with the floors in place, and so we went through all of this, and we put in an air source heat pump. We floated some new concrete into the building. We polished the floors up so that they've all got like diamond polished concrete inside, and then we completely built some new doors, sealed all the windows, and put heat recovery systems. We had to look for very special ones because there wasn't room in the building to do that. So we've now got another house that we use with tourists, shall we say, and costing about 25 quid a month to keep warm for all the electricity. A lot of PV that heats up the water and a lot of tricks and things in there. And because I spent a lot of time actually in business going back around Europe and over to the States, a bit of a bad conscience. So we got into rewilding. And so we were rewilding quite a big chunk of the Scottish borders, planting trees and what have you. And what we decided to do was to build an eco building on there, but it was going to be completely off-grid. So batteries, photovoltaic, vertical axis windmill, and that kind of thing. So we're in the process of building that at the moment. So, and our own water source into the building and doing. So essentially, without any leanings towards any utilities whatsoever. and it's a completely independent building. In fact, you can't even get your car to it. You have to walk, which is probably a good thing anyway. So what's interesting is we've gone through these different stages. One is a big timber frame, 5-bedroom building, and then a smaller farm workers building, and then an off-grid. And if somebody says, what's your conclusion with all of this? Is that we already had a pre-chat beforehand, and one of the things was ventilation, keep away the drafts, keep the house pretty well sealed, but get fresh air in. But the other thing, after all these years, what I realized was we build our houses too big. We have too much space. And, you know, I've obviously gone through a generation where we had a small house when I was a child. You build one up. This house has got 5 bedrooms. It's great at Christmas when everybody gets together. But then there's 364 other days when we're not all together. And what do you do with it? So what we seem to have done in the UK is build very big houses and fill them up with IKEA furniture. And with lots of rooms and not really using them too much. And I've suddenly realized, in actual fact, you could actually live in quite comfortably in quite a small house. And I know there's a big drive towards tiny houses at the moment, but they're very sustainable. And what I'm experimenting with was the off-grid building. So we're actually in the fields next to us. We had lots of sheep, about 350 sheep. So last weekend, we sheared all them and we put them all into plastic bags, and that's going into the off-grid building. And air miles for the insulation is probably about 20 yards, which is not a bad thing at all. And the timber that we're using there is from the local sawmill. Again, air miles, nothing, it's half a mile away. And we're using the wood from there to finish the whole thing off. So it's a bit experimental and it's also a bit satisfying in a way, but there's lots of tips and ideas that we're coming through. Built the whole, this particular off-grid one, instead of putting a foundation down and filling it all with concrete, we thought, this can't be right. And then I looked towards Scandinavia again, and when you've got these hutters up in the mountains, or the Norwegian summer huts and what have you, they're on the mountainside, and the mountainside's like this. You don't want to pour concrete and all this. So they've actually invented in Scandinavia giant screws, 2 meters tall, ground screws. And we've used these now in our off-grid building. It took a day and no concrete. And we screwed it all in, and we did some tests. 2 millimeters from one end to the other, out of balance, and that was it. And then we can just build on it. And of course, we're going to make it completely sealed and airtight. And this obviously was going to have off-grid, battery-powered vertical access windmill, and all those kind of things. So we'll have lot of, and actually the thing is we all seem to build our houses in the wrong direction. South is over here, well, it is in this house, and this is where all our glass is, and it keeps warming everything up. And I keep seeing people building houses at different funny angles, so they're not getting all the PV, and they're not getting any of the, well, you architects know that, what is it, the passive heating of the sun as it passes the south of the building. So the buildings we're working on at the moment is due south, absolutely spot on due south, lots of glass, no windows anywhere else, essentially, and that's just going to keep warm. So I'm afraid I haven't got any slides, and what I have got is a tan, and the reason I got a tan is because I've been working for a last few weeks out, putting the ground screws in and leveling all things up. So, and after this, back out on the land to carry on. So practical stuff is what I'm involved in at the moment. So I think I didn't put a timer on, Chris. I'm sorry.
I think you're probably pretty close to your allocated time, Mike. So that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful, and I think it's a great lesson to us all that so you had your hinterland of experience and education in the sectors that we're talking about here, but you've kind of learned on the job as you're going along, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. And so here you are, almost living the dream in that respect, and so turning to local resource and local material. I mean, I'm astonished that your insulation comes from the next field. I think that's absolutely wonderful. So nothing we can add to that, and I certainly don't think I can top that this evening. So I'm going to thank you very much indeed, Mike. I'm going to go across to Chris now, if that's all right. So Chris, hello, good evening. So this is Chris Herring, and Chris is director of the Green Building Store in Golka in Huddersfield. So so very much a fabulous local resource. And also, Chris is one of the UK's leading experts in high performance window design, but also very, very significantly, Chris is the current chair of the Passivhaus Trust. So across to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Chris. And I have to say, Mike, that I really enjoyed the presentation without PowerPoint. And I say that because I'm going to drown you in PowerPoint. So I'm afraid. So I'll just share my screen, if I may, and see if that slideshow, my computer will. Are we there?
We are indeed, Chris, yes.
Okay, right. So I'm going to build really up on particularly what Mike said and talk about Passivhaus. And I've just called this making buildings more sustainable because I see Passivhaus as having a key role in making buildings more sustainable. This slide is the thin blue line. This is where we live. This is our home in a very dark universe. So, and clearly we are messing it up at the moment. So we need to address that. So just to say, to further the introduction, really, Green Building Store is based just outside Huddersfield at Balstamore, anybody who's local. We sell, we provide consultancy, we sell products to promote energy efficient buildings. We pioneered Passivhaus in the UK. This is the Denbigh Passivhaus, which is, as you might think, it's Denbigh. It's one of the first passive houses in the UK, built in the UK in 2010. And since then, we've done several more passive houses. We've done quite a lot of retrofits. Interesting talk about retrofit we might come back to. But the main core of the business is actually selling products and knowledge. I am also, as Chris has said, chair of the Passivhaus Trust in the UK. I helped found it in 2010. And of course, Passivhaus has really taken off in the last 10, 11 years. You can see the takeoff to 2020 here, and still growing very fast and having a real influence on the construction industry, which I shall come back to. And just a reminder, of course, of where we are. So this is, we know that this decade is the critical decade probably for humanity for the next however many years, a long time. This is the critical moment for us. Or as Greta Thunberg says, our house is on fire. So, and I would say that there is no such thing as sustainable building. We need to make all buildings sustainable. That's our responsibility now. It's a time of crisis. And certainly when we're doing new build, that's what we should be taking into account. And a reminder that, there is an awful lot to talk about powering up, how we get our power, where we take it from, renewables, etc. But to go alongside that, we need to power down. We must reduce our energy use so that we can then bring it from sustainable sources. And to do that, of course, we need to, as the slide shows here, we need to take the low-hanging fruit first. And one of the places where there are low-hanging fruit is currently in new build. So this is just by way of introduction, really. The blue house on the left is thermographic image, and obviously the colder the colour, the colder the building. That means it's not leaking heat. And the house in the centre there on the left is actually in the street in Hereford. It's the first passive house retrofit in the UK. And you can see that it's losing very little heat. The house on the right I grabbed off Google, but basically it probably could be any new build, most new builds in the UK, and a lot of other sort of existing housing stock leaking lots of heat. And that's the story we're looking at really with Passivhaus. So this is what we build to at the moment, Part L, the building regulations, and we have to bear in mind that this is a minimum standard. This is the legal minimum. We can't build worse than this. It's the worst possible standard we can build to. But if we're going to move beyond building regulations, and as individuals, we often want to do that, and Mike's given a very good example of the work he's done, but also as a country, we need to move beyond current building regulations. We need some signposts with something on them. And this is where Passivhaus really comes in. Passivhaus is about energy efficiency. This is Dr. Feist, who with a group of colleagues have developed the concept. We'll see a little bit more in a minute. And it's all about minimizing the heat needed to make us comfortable in the building. But the other sides of Passivhaus, of course, are comfort and a very healthy indoor environment. Now, you can build on that further with something like the WELL standard, and the WELL standard goes very well with Passivhaus. That's certainly people have experimented with that as well. But fundamentally, if you build to Passivhaus standard, you will get a much better indoor environment than you will with a conventionally built house at the moment. And the important thing to bear in mind is the performance gap. Now, Dr. Feist, when he was looking at this, was looking at the efforts to increase the performance of buildings in the 70s and 80s, and people were doing that and not actually getting the reduction in energy that they expected. And that gap between what you think you're going to get and what you do get is called the performance gap. And Dr. Feist set out to find out why he built these experimental houses in the early 90s, and out of that has grown the Passivhaus standard. But this story is, if my slides will move on, is replicated across the UK and in fact across the world in many ways. So this is work done locally by Leeds Beckett University, the Centre for the Built Environment, and they've monitored a number of buildings. So they do co-heating tests, which is a physical test of the building. They're not relying on occupant usage. They actually physically warm the building up and measure the heat loss. And the blue columns for each building show what was predicted, and the red columns show what was measured. And you can see there is a big gap in performance generally. And the Passivhaus Trust has done some work. There's not a lot of data on this, but using what data there is. And on average, we think that the average performance gap is around 2/3. So we're designing 60% worse than what we think we're designing. Interestingly here, the small sample of Passivhaus dwellings had very, very low predicted energy use, and there was very little performance gap. And that result on passive houses has been replicated again and again in the last 20 or more years of passive houses around the world. So what is it? Well, it's fundamentally what we build now is in effect active. We allow heat to leak out of our buildings, and then we put heat in to make us comfortable. With a passive house, we reduce that heat loss as far as we can, as far as sensible, and make ourselves comfortable by not losing heat, and then putting a tiny amount in just to top up. And these are the things we need to do. Mike's already talked about all of this really, but continuous insulation and quite a lot of it, rather a lot more than we use in the current building regulations. We need to particularly eliminate thermal bridges, places which we often ignore at the moment. We're not really driven to do that rigorously, but in passive house you are, so those have a real effect on the performance of the building. High levels of air tightness, and Mike certainly talked about that, and we need buildings that are sealed. There is no point insulating if you don't make a building airtight as well. Typically passive house is about 30 times more airtight than current building regulations. We will use triple glazed windows in this climate. They will give us the optimum performance. And then, sorry, I jumped too fast there. There we are. And we will need a mechanical ventilation system that recovers the heat from our outgoing air, but also ensures that we get optimal ventilation. And that means we get much better comfort and much better air quality. People worry that sealed buildings are unhealthy or feel unhealthy. Most people go into a passive house and say, oh, it feels fresh. It's a nice feel to it. We do need to think about orientations. Mike mentioned we're not rigorously bound to face south, but we need to model it and make sure of the full performance of the building. If you have all north-facing glazing, the building will not perform as well. And we need to think about the form factor, the surface area in relation to the floor area, because that is the bigger the surface area, the more heat loss. So that we're driven to do that. We need something that accurately models what the building does so that we know what we're building. I regularly get people saying, I want to super insulate, I want to do this and that. And I say to them, do you know what you're getting for spending this extra money? Do you actually know how your building is going to perform? And they don't. The Passive House Planning Package is a very efficient design and verification tool. And finally, what Passive House gives us is a quality assurance system. Now, we don't really quality assure our buildings. We quality assure nearly everything we have made, but we'll buy a house that is barely quality assured, that has a minimal checking, if you like. And, you know, tragically, that's what Grenfell was partly about. So Passivhaus gives us a really high level of quality assurance. There are some myths about Passivhaus, particularly that it's all about houses. And certainly there are lots of individual houses around the UK, but there are also larger developments like Goldsmith Street, which won the Sterling Prize a couple of years ago. This one here in Norwich, 100 odd units, or this project here in Camden, it's going to be 400 units eventually, all to Passivhaus standard. York is just developing a 600 unit residential unit development. But it's also about larger buildings. So the Leicester University Medical School, I think, is still the largest Passivhaus in the UK at the moment. And Exeter is developing transport interchange and leisure centre to the Passivhaus standard. That's being in construction by Kia at the moment. So what you get, building Passivhaus, you get a comfortable building, you get a healthy building, and you get, obviously, energy efficiency, lower CO2 emissions, lower bills. So that's the package you get from it. And this is what we think we get. So again, this is estimated work done by the Passivhaus Trust, looking at regulated energy. That's the energy covered by the building regulations. And our calculations show that Passivhaus will, on average, be about 55% lower in theory. But remember the performance gap. So that was theory. What do we think in practice? If you take the average performance gap, we think it's around 60%, then a Passivhaus will be about basically 75% lower than the average new build in the UK. The Committee on Climate Change agrees with us effectively. In looking at how new homes should perform by 2025, they said space heat demand 15 to 20 kilowatt hours per metre squared per annum. That is the Passivhaus standard. That basically that metric comes from the Passivhaus standard. And obviously we're looking at the future homes standard in 2025. Net zero carbon is the metric we're working with. And we don't know where that's going at the moment. But what we do know is, again, some work the Passivhaus Trust has done, and that's downloadable from our website. The most efficient way of getting to net zero carbon in a building is to build Passivhaus standard fabric and then add on some renewables. That's the most efficient way of getting there. Now, it isn't all about operational energy, of course. So what about embodied carbon, embodied energy? Well, the important thing here is this, you know, there are different figures for this. This is work done by the London Energy Transformation Initiative, LETI. They looked at typical new build over the lifetime of the building. Around, well, 67% in this case, they're saying, is operational energy. And 21% was embodied energy. So the obvious thing, the low-hanging fruit, is to get that operational energy down first. Passivhaus is a very good methodology to get there and probably most effective. Once we've done that, we should be thinking about embodied energy as well, of course. And if we want to do that, Passivhaus actually has a very nice tool recently developed which models the operational and embodied energy through the lifetime of the building. And you can put in your building once you've used your Passivhaus planning package and model it through and see what that total performance is. But of course, there's even wider impact we have to think about, the ecological impact. However we look at it, cradle to cradle or EPDs, whatever, but we need to look at that. It's very important. And many Passivhaus designers are working with those ideas as well. Passivhaus doesn't cover that. It covers the operational energy, but it's also very important, and I would never deny that we need to be looking at that and thinking about the materials we use. And it is a lot, as Mike said, about we building houses too big. We need efficiency. We also need sufficiency. What do we actually need? And sometimes we can minimize our use of materials, and that will help, like the Mike's sheet wool, for instance. This is the work of the Passivhaus Trust. Basically, our plan at the moment is to ensure that Passivhaus remains a beacon for the industry, what can really be achieved, where we should be going. We want to make sure that that is done properly, so we will continue to promote and support that and control it in a sense. Well, maybe 1% of the market, it's not 1% at the moment. but we want that knowledge to spread out into the industry. So our plan or our ambition is to train the industry, as many people as we can within the industry. We've put 10% as the aim in the next 10 years, so that knowledge is spreading out. And we've got people with real expertise going out into the industry. And then we want to influence the whole of the industry. And we are already doing that. When people talk about Passivhaus, it really does act as a beacon. So we want to influence the lot. And actually, interestingly, our head of policy and research has just been poached by MHCLG for a senior civil service post. So we have somebody with really real building physics knowledge within MHCLG, and which is quite unusual, because in my experience, most people there have actually got economics degrees or whatever, PP, whatever it is. So I think that's really important, that influence. So that's me. I think I'm just over 10 minutes, Chris. I'm sorry for that. Thank you for listening, and very happy to answer questions as we move forward.
Fantastic. Well, what a wonderful introduction to the principle of the Passivhaus there, Chris. So thank you very much indeed for that, and a real sort of whistle-stop tour.
I don't think I've ever done it so fast, Chris, to be honest.
I appreciated that. I think all our speakers probably had much more to say, and certainly I know that you were virtually bubbling with enthusiasm there, Chris, for that as well. So I've got a couple of questions and a couple of points in here as well. I think the first point I want to sort of make is perhaps to take Rob up on his invitation of people sort of whizzing across to Liverpool to have a look at the spine and what you're doing there. And Gideon Richards from one of our Sustainable Huddersfield gentlemen is saying it'd be great to organise a trip. So I don't know, how do we get in touch, Rob, and how do we decide to sort of become?
Yeah, sure. If you coordinate from the Sustainable Huddersfield side, Chris, I can organise that with the college. I've got the gold key to get us into the building.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you've got the code for the building or the right fingerprint, then
that's right. And we, jump on the train. It's not even an hour to Liverpool on the fast train from Huddersfield.
Absolutely. Well, that's a great open invitation. So thanks once again, Rob.
Could I just add into that? Sorry. I think it's always inspiring to see buildings. You really do learn a lot, and I certainly encourage people to go and see a well building like that one. It's the same thing with Passivhaus. The best. In fact, something Wolfgang Weiss said to me a long time ago was, the most important thing is to get the buildings built as the exemplars and get people to see them. The Passivhaus movement across the world opens up buildings in November. So we try and have open days. Obviously, last year they were all virtual, sadly, but the previous 10 years we've run Green Building Store. We've run open days in early November around a number of our Passivhaus projects. So if you are interested in visiting, talking to people who live in passive houses or seeing what can be done, look out for that wherever you live.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for that, Chris. And that's a very, very sort of good pointer there.